There seems to be one specific trait that decides Nen type, which I think was revealed when that exhibit came out a few years ago. Hisoka noticed it's tied to personality, but you can have any one trait for a number of reasons. So since there's a noticeable effect on personalities that Hisoka could pick up on, it seems like whatever decides Nen type is something that tends to cause those traits. Instead of being a one-to-one guarantee, the personality types Hisoka describes are also symptoms, some of the possible ways the actual criteria can manifest. In order to find out what the criteria is, instead of finding one trait shared by all the personalities of each category, we need to look for a single possible cause in common for the various personalities all the members develop. So when we line each Nen type up, we should be able to see 6 distinct trends that all relate to each other in one single system. But we can narrow down the system if we can answer whether specialist is a blanket category for exceptions to the rule, or just another base category whose trait just resembles uniqueness because of what it represents. When the advanced Nen chart came out, showing which character personalities leaned into other categories, all the specialists were rounded together, and we could see who was closer to the category, which was the missing link for filling in the full thing. Every Nen type has a distinct theme behind its characters and tied to what it does. The criteria, since Hatsu provides conscious skills and requires brain exercises to develop, would be tied to cognition in some way, and the brain has a lot of wiggle room for how it develops the processes behind the way your thinking functions by the time you're born, but it has to be built through algorithms like any program. And even if a random variable has equal chances for each possible value, they still have to be indexed, meaning one is written first. The natural value of evolving the ability to feel and experience, to have an actual existence and not just be meat, is that in the driver's seat, an animal can evaluate circumstances and then control its own actions to adapt. That being that exists in a creature is the homing part of a homing missile. So as a human, where each moment of your existence is defined by you being the current step in a chain of processing stuff, your reflex that lets you actually respond to stimuli has to be developed with some sort of default, since your experiences can be broken down into single steps at a time. When you, the person, and not the unconscious calculator muscle of your brain, are prompted to process something, either at its core, your reflex is to initially act on it or to think, and the two concepts that direct your processing, because you need to prioritize between stimuli, are emotions, which are basic but immediate response trends that adjust your behavior to quicker signs of important data from around your perspective for stuff you'd lose the chance to address if you had to process it first, and interests, the concepts you comprehend the world through, that engineer what you focus on from within your processing. The premise of Hatsu is that you're trying to pave pathways into your brain that you can then use aura through, which means the way your thinking is structured already aligns with certain ways of using Nen, and you're using your brain with its alignment to make those pathways. A person's Nen type depends on what they have of the 6 priorities of cognition. If your cognition prioritizes acting over thinking, prompted by your emotions, you're an emitter. This could result in people with short tempers who let themselves lose control or rush through things, or people who would lean into some kind of elitism with a personal feeling of satisfaction. So it fits they're aligned with the power to launch and displace things and project things like the inner emotions they let out into the world. If your cognition prioritizes acting over thinking without a specific form of direction, you're an enhancer. You could be a smart or thoughtful guy. This is just from steps your brain took to build itself. So someone whose core is to act, just in general, would tend to be straightforward and commit to an intense level, which is why they have the power to purely amplify something without changing anything around or about it. If you're driven to act by your interests, you're a transmuter. Your behavior is directed from within by your focus. So you might be fickle or unruly or have no issue lying. Someone whose actions are centered around whatever they're into would fit with the power to adjust something, altering what it is by shifting its properties, because they shift their decisions around a focal point. Conjurers would be people driven to think instead of act, but prompted by their emotions, so they might develop into people who are frequently stressed and on the verge of a breakdown, or who tend to be spiritual and think within certain convictions, like an opposite form of emitters. And it fits they have a power to produce something that's not there before, since their emotions lead to a new worldview. Specialists would just be people driven to think instead of act, for better or worse. You could end up with someone who has extra insight or appreciation for their situations, or you could have someone that's stunted because they drowned out external logic at an early age. Even better specialists end up cutting off their thinking and insist on values in order to cope and actually get somewhere, since otherwise otherwise, their tendency is to just continue spiraling. But it also explains why specialism is the only category you can be said to fully swap to, and why there's no bleed through into other categories. Thinking can spiral, so if any trend of cognition can be overwritten and keep its guys tethered, it's this one. Specialists may be rare because the setting is a mirror of nature, so evolutionarily you'd want to evolve away from a trait that drives itself into the ground. And fitting the message, with a society now in place that neglects its own intellect, specialists are able to thrive and take advantage of their mystique. But in the real world, I'm pretty sure this category would be way more common, and most people within it would need Morena's guidance because they just have no talent for Nen. Because no matter what type you have, you've got to be a beast before you can move on from the basics. Then we have Manipulator, prompted to think around their interests. These are characters that would obsess over a subject, so why working with an object of value is handy for their abilities, or characters who tend to warp and categorize things to process them around specific models, which is why their power is to control something's behavior through its various characteristics, like assigning an overall purpose to it. Illumi's a really strong manipulator, and a perfect example of someone who thinks obsessively and maps out his subject of interest to a system. And yeah, I think I know where I'd lie on the chart, but we can see how someone like Milluki, who isolates himself in his room to indulge in his hobbies, might start to dip into specialist. With Hatsu depending on training to learn mental skills by doing mentally stimulating tasks, it fits if the way your brain initially developed to dictate your processing is the most significant factor for which effects of Nen your brain will build pathways for and let you tap into at will. But also, the cycle between yin and yang has 6 states, as yin and yang alternate by appearing from within each other. There's waxing yang, complete yang, waning yang, waxing yin, complete yin, and waning yin, where the cycle is primarily yang or yin, and it can be in the process of emerging or going away. Daoism is fundamental to power systems like Dragon Ball and Hunter x Hunters, and Hunter x Hunter brings back the relevance of yin and yang by having strength come from balanced opposites in a ring. You can see how the philosophy of logic actively stemming from and feeding into relationships of cycles is the core to the power system in how a top Nen user like Jing visualizes making blobs out of Nen, when they're just movements of the surface of a single substance, but that mental approach to treating them as different objects gets them to interact that way. Yang is associated with might and vitality, whereas yin is associated with thought and potential. So the 6 states of a cycle of yin and yang embody the different concepts behind each Nen category. With Enhancer and Specialist as the 2 extremes, Emitter and Conjurer lead into them, prompted by emotions around their point of view from outside, and Transmuter and Manipulator lead out of them, prompted by interests from their center of focus within. And just like how Nen follows a cycle, you should follow this channel and put this video on loop to watch it 50 times, because I've been sacrificing my sleep cycle to get 3 videos out a week. For next week, I was thinking about covering what specialism actually does as sort of an epilogue to this, because then it leads into techniques for Hatsu optimization, and then some of the mechanics behind how Skill Hunter works, which opens the door to stuff like theoretical, algorithm-based breakdowns of Hatsu for maybe crazy slots, or how conceptually the stronger enhancers build up their Nen. But going over Tsuridnik as a character might be neat to people too. There are plenty of things to talk about, it's just hard to keep a script clear over a certain length, without breaking off into tangents, or getting rambly, or not knowing how to connect the separate points together, but that depends, I guess.